Shrinking to Fit. Dispatches from the Ministry of Feedback. By Elias Winter, July 11th, 2025. Read by an automated voice.
Part 1. The Ministry of Feedback. A play in several uncomfortable acts. As recorded by Elias Winter, Department of Existential Analytics. Dramatis Personae. K. Manager. Wielder of process, lover of visibility, master of the calendar invite. Motto: let's circle back. Ted. Skip-level manager. Avatar of corporate abstraction, seen only in Zoom profile photo. Elias. That's you. A prophet in the land of per my last email. Surrounding voices. A Greek chorus of Slack notifications and HR policy PDFs. Act 1. The Ritual of Inclusion. A sterile open office. Kay stands beside a whiteboard titled Our Values. Elias sits, notebook in hand, already regretting the last few months. Kay. Elias, great to see you. Love what you're doing with those analytics. Really bringing structure to chaos. Beat, conspiratorial. But could you, maybe bring a little less? Structure is great, but we don't want to, disrupt the process. Elias. So, you want me to fix things, but not change anything? Kay, exactly. That's the spirit. Change is great, as long as everything stays the same. Elias. Is this a real job, or am I in a Samuel Beckett play? Kay, haha. We love your energy. By the way, could you update Jira for that thing we talked about? Not that anyone will read it, but visibility. Act 2. Feedback, a drama in 3 bullet points. Later, a leadership meeting. Ted appears as a floating head on a TV. Elias is present, included, but Kay blocks the only exit. Ted. Team, I just want to reiterate how excited I am to support your success. Elias, you've been here what? A month? Checks notes. Yes, a few months actually. That's almost tenure here. Kay. Ted, I just wanted to share some feedback from stakeholders. Elias is not humble enough. Elias has too many opinions. Elias doesn't master the company, whatever that means. Elias. Is this feedback or performance art? Ted. We love to see engagement. Keep it up, Elias. Kay. But also, dial it down, Elias. Elias. So you want me to have strong opinions, weakly held and never expressed? Kay, now you're getting it. Also, could you mentor Sam? But don't manage him. And could you take more IC tickets? But don't be an IC. And remember, if you need anything, my door is always, there's a Slack channel. Act 3. Recovery as competitive sport. Elias in a dimly lit room, clutching a cup of coffee, staring at a wall of sticky notes. Don't relapse. Be humble. Stop fixing things. Enter the Greek chorus, murmuring sync, visibility, collaboration. Elias. I tried meditating, but the only mantra I hear is circle back. I tried to stay sober, but the Slack notifications are basically drug triggers. Kay. Popping in through a Google Meet link uninvited. Elias, just checking in. We noticed you seemed a little intense in that meeting. Remember, we're a family here, but not a family that likes honesty. Elias. What if I just disappeared into the ether? Would anyone notice, or would I be assigned as my own backfill? Kay, that's the spirit. And hey, quick FYI, we're going to need you to fill out this survey about psychological safety. But be honest, unless it upsets anyone. Act 4. The Exit Interview. A choose-your-own adventure. A hallway lined with glass trophies. Best Place to Work 2018. Elias stands with a cardboard box. Kay hands over a mug with the word resilience on it. Kay, Elias, we're so sad to see you go, but we're also so happy for you and a little relieved. And also, have you filled out your Confluence documentation? You know, for the next profit. Elias, you know what, Kay? I hope you achieve everything you truly desire, which, if I'm reading the room, is plausible deniability and full calendar visibility. Ted, on Zoom, as always. Elias, your voice will be missed. Mute button. Kay, we'll always have Slack. Elias, just remember, wherever you go, don't be yourself. It's for your own good. Curtain. Elias walks out, head high, as Kay quietly adds another bullet to the Lessons Learned Confluence page. Don't hire prophets. It disturbs the synergy. Final note from Elias Winter. America runs on caffeine, shame, and visibility. If you're reading this in an office, blink twice if you need rescue. If you're Kay, don't worry, I CC'd Ted. If you're Ted, you'll see this on LinkedIn in 3 months. And if you, like me, survive the Ministry of Feedback, you are not alone. Your clarity is not a liability. Your exit interview is a birth certificate. File it under Best Practices, Unheeded.
Shrinking to fit. The anatomy of survival and self-erosion. Before a child is scolded for speaking too loudly, before a worker lowers their eyes in the fluorescent hush of the office, before the colonized subject softens their accent, or the woman folds her body into the smallest seat on the train, before all of it, the human animal learned to survive by shrinking. The instinct did not begin with civilization, or even with language. It is older than memory, older than myth. To shrink is to sense danger, to read the room, to calculate the cost of standing tall. It is to learn, in the marrow, that safety may require silence, belonging may require disappearance, and life itself may demand the constant, humming discipline of becoming less. This is not merely a story of oppression, nor a mere indictment of culture, gender, or empire, though it is all of these. It is a study in adaptation, both heroic and wounding, in the genius of survival and the slow calcification of habit. Over millennia, the act of shrinking to fit has traveled from the animal body to the mythic imagination, from the law code to the neural pathway, from the whispered warning to the digital algorithm. It is the secret architecture beneath the world's religions, its bureaucracies, its families, its therapies, and its screens. And yet, in every epoch, there have been those who refused to become small, who paid the price of refusal, or who taught the world, at unbearable cost, the hidden shape of its own cage. To trace the genealogy of shrinking to fit is to chart the story of civilization itself, how we became who we are, and what it costs to remain unseen. It is a map of the soul under pressure, a ledger of wounds and refusals, and a call, still faint, still unfinished, to claim space where none was granted. Let us begin at the beginning, in a world without words, and follow the thread of smallness to its modern edge. Chapter 1. Prehistory and Survival. Before the birth of myth or memory, shrinking to fit was the silent law of life. The world of the first humans was not yet divided by city walls or crowned by kings. It was a world of predators and hunger, of fleeting warmth and the terror of exile. In this world, survival was not a matter of bravado or relentless expansion, but of knowing when to yield, when to vanish in the tall grass, when to bow before the powerful, when to swallow one's voice for another day. We did not invent this strategy. Our cousins in the forest, apes and wolves and crows, knew it long before us. The posture of the low-ranking chimp, the lowered eyes of the pack's runt, the hushed stillness of prey. These are the gestures of smallness written in the body's script. Among the earliest humans, to be too bold was to risk the leader's wrath or the group's suspicion. Belonging was a matter of nuance, of shrinking one's desires and camouflaging difference. The social brain, evolving in campfires and night-long watches, learned the cost of arrogance and the blessing of invisibility. But this adaptive genius bore a hidden cost. What began as the wisdom of reading danger became, over time, a kind of inheritance. A script of self-restraint passed down long after the threats had changed. The stories our ancestors told, of gods who punished pride, of mortals undone by their own ambition, were not just warnings, but reminders that survival itself might demand an artful concealment of one's size. In the architecture of ancient dwellings, in the faded pigment of cave hands not included in the hunt, we glimpse a culture in which privacy was rare and fitting in was non-negotiable. So the reflex survives, older than words, alive in our bodies and customs. Shrinking to fit became not only a strategy, but an instinct, a pressure that outlasted the dangers it was meant to avert. It is with us still, encoded in the shyness of the child, the modesty of the stranger, the hush that falls in the presence of authority. Before we could name the wound, we had already learned to carry it. Chapter 2. Ancient Civilizations and Hierarchy. The dawn of civilization brought a new kind of shrinking, a smallness not only for survival, but for order. In the river valleys of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Indus, hierarchy became the architecture of existence, and the few who stood tall did so by commanding the many to kneel. Kings and priests ascended to divine status, their magnitude measured by the shadows they cast over the lives of farmers, artisans, and slaves. Obedience was no longer a matter of instinct, but of law. It was woven into rituals, carved into tablets, enforced in silence. Ceremony governed every gesture, each movement of the body scripted to reflect distance from power. The forbidden glance toward the pharaoh, the ritualized bow before the emperor, the regulated colors of cloth or types of speech. These were not mere traditions, but disciplines of containment. Deference was not optional. It was the boundary between life and punishment. Speech itself became rationed. Women, foreigners, and the poor were taught the art of vanishing within a crowd, their words measured, their presence trimmed to the edge of invisibility. Nowhere did the requirement to shrink become more total than in the governance of gender. Patriarchy was not simply a fact, but a vocation, inscribed in the architecture of homes and the laws of nations. Women's bodies, voices, and hopes were bounded by walls both real and imagined. Seclusion, binding, silence, and shame. Across continents and centuries, "You must be less" became the catechism of womanhood, its echoes still pulsing in the most private choices of daughters and mothers. But if shrinking became the rule, the refusal to shrink became a kind of sacrilege. The slave who rebelled, the peasant who rose, the prophet who denounced the king, all risked not only death, but erasure from memory itself. Their stories, when they survived, became fables of the cost of expansion, nemesis for the proud, the fall of Babel, the martyr's fire. The interiorization of smallness grew profound. Children learned early what could not be said or dreamed. The wisdom of obedience was passed through story and ritual until it became as invisible as breath and as binding. The structure of civilization is built atop this shrinking. The individual's smallness for the grandeur of the few, humility as a sacrament of survival. The world's oldest habits remain beneath our skin, shaping institutions, echoing in the silences of our daily lives. The work of civilization is also the work of remembering what it asked us to lose. Chapter 3. Religious and Moral Traditions. In the age of prophets and scriptures, the logic of shrinking to fit was sanctified and transformed. What began as a survival instinct, then as a civic discipline, now became a spiritual command. The world's great religions did not simply enforce humility. They elevated it, draping smallness in the garments of virtue. The path to heaven was charted not by expansion, but by surrender, to God, to fate, to the cosmic order. In this era, the disappearance of self was transfigured into holiness, and the art of effacement became the road to moral purity. The traditions of humility are ancient and global. In the Hebrew Psalms, the humble are raised. In the Christian Gospels, the meek inherit the earth. In Islam, the word itself means submission, and the believer bows in literal and psychic lowering before the absolute. In India and China, renunciation and yielding of pride, will, desire are praised as the highest forms of wisdom. The monk in his cell, the nun in her silence, the hermit in the desert. Each embodies the ideal of shrinking past the bounds of society toward a divine emptiness. But every spiritual ideal has its shadow. Humility, wielded by priests and princes, became a tool of order and suppression. The powerful blessed the obedience of the many, demanded silence as virtue, and pronounced smallness as sanctity, especially for women, whose quietness, modesty, and invisibility were lauded as marks of the sacred. Children were taught that ambition was prideful, uniqueness a temptation, anger a sin. Self-erasure became not only the price of belonging, but the sign of spiritual health. And yet, resistance was never wholly extinguished. Mystics spoke of union not as annihilation, but as fulfillment. Reformers challenged the confusion of God's will with human power. Each tradition birthed its critics, its underground currents of refusal. The legacy of these struggles persists in therapy and recovery, in the slow journey from holy shrinking toward a sacred presence, a worth that does not require smallness, a voice that does not trespass. In the theater of religion and morality, shrinking to fit became both wound and wisdom, cage and key. Its double edge has cut across the centuries, marking the soul with the ambiguity of virtue. How much of our disappearance is holiness, and how much is fear? Chapter 4. Colonialism, Race, and Oppression. When empire spread its shadow across continents, shrinking to fit became a world system. Here, the demand to become small was not a mere negotiation with power, but a global ritual of erasure, shaming, and survival. The colonizer required not just labor or tribute, but acquiescence, the bending of spine and tongue, the abandonment of names and memories, the conversion of confidence into a furtive mask. To shrink was not only to survive, but to disappear, to allow the foreign gaze to define the boundaries of presence, dignity, and even the right to speak. The logic of shrinking was enforced with violence and ritual humiliation. The subject learned to step aside, avert their eyes, bow, apologize for being. Indigenous languages were outlawed, stories silenced, clothes and customs remade in the image of the master. In this regime, even survival strategies, smiling, code-switching, hiding anger, feigning ignorance, became arts of the invisible, learned from childhood, inscribed in muscle and accent. The body itself became a battleground, every gesture weighed for threat, every word a calculation. Racialized shrinking was policed with unblinking brutality. In the South, black men and women risked death for pride, for looking a white person in the eye, for the crime of being unafraid. Black women, doubly marked, were commanded to efface not only race but gender, to render their strength invisible, their minds inoffensive. The cost of not shrinking could be swift and terminal. The cost of shrinking was the slow corrosion of soul, the permanent tension of watchfulness. Colonial oppression went deeper than law or custom. It entered the psyche. The colonized learned to see themselves as inferior, to mistrust their own voice, to aspire to become palatable to those who ruled them. The genius of survival became the inheritance of anxiety, vigilance, and longing. Some passed, some mimicked, some vanished inside a borrowed skin. Yet always, beneath the mask, lived the hidden transcript, the jokes, the rituals, the stubborn song, the memory kept alive behind closed doors. In this age, shrinking to fit was both wounding and heroic, a way to keep hope and story alive where speaking could kill. Its scars and strategies linger in nations and families, in accents and silences, in every child taught not to stand out, not to speak their mother's name in public. Colonialism did not invent shrinking, but it globalized the wound, leaving a world of voices still fighting to be heard, bodies still learning to expand beyond the limits set by another's fear. Chapter 5. Modernity, Industrialization, and Conformity. Modernity did not liberate us from shrinking to fit. It engineered new forms and spread them everywhere. The factory bell replaced the overseer's whip, the clock replaced the ritual, and the need to survive became the need to comply, to become efficient, reliable, and indistinguishable. The great engines of industry and bureaucracy required not rebellion or idiosyncrasy, but a precise narrowing of the self, a disciplined shrinking into roles, uniforms, and scripts. The new world was measured by the logic of machines, punctuality, repetition, standardization. The worker in the mill, the clerk in the office, the child in the schoolroom, all were shaped by systems designed to suppress excess, unpredictability, and difference. The good student learned silence and obedience. The good employee checked personality at the door. The good woman sacrificed her ambition and her body to domesticity or fashion's cruel geometry. Everywhere, rules multiplied. What to wear, how to speak, where to stand, when to feel. Conformity became a requirement, not just for safety, but for participation itself. Media and advertising built new standards for belonging. The image of the ideal body, the proper family, the smiling citizen was broadcast as commandment and lure. Surveillance seeped into daily life. The boss, the teacher, the neighbor, and soon the camera trained us to anticipate judgment, to self-correct before being corrected. Dissent was pathologized, the eccentric labeled mad, the disobedient delinquent, the ambitious unfeminine or dangerous. Even the project of therapy, born to heal wounds, risked enforcing new norms for acceptable feeling, acceptable expansion. Beneath the rational surface, the ancient reflex endured. Am I too much? Will I be punished if I do not disappear? The longing to break free, to reclaim space, to voice, to presence, became the engine of both alienation and revolt. Modernity universalized shrinking, democratized its discipline, and left its citizens anxious in the very moment they were promised freedom. To survive the age of the machine, we learned once more to make ourselves small. Chapter 6. Psychology, Resistance, and Naming. In the long 20th century, the discipline of shrinking to fit was finally brought into the light, not to sanctify or justify, but to interrogate, to wound with knowledge, and to resist. What was once instinct or law, ritual or virtue, became pathology, a symptom, a burden, a pattern to be unlearned. Psychology peeled back the skin of civilization and found, underneath, a network of shame, repression, and unspoken grief. The new project was not obedience, but visibility, not disappearing, but emergence. Freud and the inventors of depth psychology mapped the price of shrinking in the private theater of the mind. Repression, they said, was the foundation of culture, but also the root of neurosis. Childhood became a site of study and mourning. How the girl learned to silence her anger. How the boy learned that need was dangerous. How whole generations inherited the posture of smallness from parents too wounded to expand. Therapy named what had always been suffered in silence: people-pleasing, codependence, self-erasure, and asked what might happen if the wound was opened, witnessed, healed. Resistance flourished wherever shrinking had been required. Civil rights movements, feminism, queer liberation, anti-colonial revolutions all began with the refusal to vanish, the insistence on taking up space. I am somebody. Black is beautiful. Women's liberation. The language of presence, pride, and visibility became weapons against the old orders of erasure. The right to be large, sexually, intellectually, politically, became a central demand. Even post-colonial theorists named the centuries-long silencing, asked if the subaltern could speak, and imagined new forms of unshrinking. Yet new forms of shrinking were always at hand. The age of therapy offered tools for emergence, assertiveness, boundaries, affirmation, but could also become its own regime, another checklist for belonging, another set of standards for acceptable selfhood. The digital world, with its promises of expansion, introduced new pressures to shrink, to perform, to appease the algorithm or survive the mob. The work of naming the wound was unfinished, the struggle to claim space, never secure. In this era, shrinking to fit became a story we could finally tell ourselves, and telling became its own quiet revolt. To name the wound was to loosen its grip, to reveal its genealogy, to make refusal imaginable. The unfinished work of presence, private and public, solitary and collective, became the horizon of healing, the invitation to reclaim what centuries of obedience had stolen. Chapter 7. The Digital Era and Beyond. Now we live in the panopticon, a house of mirrors and windows where shrinking to fit is performed not before a single master, but for a shifting, invisible multitude. The digital age has made everyone visible and everyone watched. To be online is to be exposed, to be judged, to be measured by algorithms and mobs, to know that any word or gesture may be summoned for scrutiny. The art of shrinking has mutated. It is no longer just deference to power, but a continual curation of the self, a dance of disappearance, compliance, and anxious calibration. We shrink to fit the algorithm, to survive the tides of outrage, to avoid the chill of cancellation or the fire of exposure. The platform rewards blandness, compliance, and sameness. It penalizes the unruly, the complicated, the inconvenient. Hypervisibility brings its own dangers, especially for those whose bodies or voices were always targeted. Many learn to split themselves, one persona for work, one for home, one for the timeline, another in private DM. The anxiety of being found out becomes permanent, a modern echo of ancient vigilance. Economic pressure sharpens the demand for smallness. Gig workers, influencers, and the precarious labor of the branded self all require adaptation to shifting tastes, mercurial platforms, anonymous customers. Authenticity itself is packaged and sold. even as the safest strategy remains a carefully managed reduction. Be just enough, never too much. And yet, the networked world holds out new forms of resistance and solidarity. Digital communities allow for a kind of expansion undreamed of by our ancestors. Movements and confessions, identities and uprisings, the refusal to be silent echoing across continents. But even here, the pressure to conform, to speak the right words, to fit the new orthodoxy, persists. The old logic repeats: belong by becoming less, speak safely, never risk too much. In the end, the struggle to unshrink, to become visible, whole, and unedited has never been more urgent or more fraught. The stage is planetary, the audience infinite, the rules always shifting. The ancient wound is now performed in real time, under the gaze of strangers and the silent sorting of machines. Whether we find new forms of presence or merely new patterns of disappearance remains unfinished, a question for the living and for those yet to be born. Epilogue: The unfinished space. There are no clean endings for the history of shrinking to fit. The reflex that once kept our ancestors alive now follows us through the corridors of power, the hush of sanctuaries, the glow of screens. It is a wound inherited and a skill perfected, both a mark of trauma and a testament to survival. In every era, shrinking has been repurposed, first as adaptation, then as law, then as piety, then as a science, then as a strategy for digital survival. The forms change, the discipline endures, but there is also another lineage, fragile and relentless, the lineage of refusal, the one who stands, the one who speaks, the one who is punished for not knowing their place. These are the rare ancestors of our unshrinking. They leave us difficult gifts: the burden of voice, the risk of expansion, the longing for a space not granted but claimed. Each generation invents new languages for the wound and new rituals for its healing. Sometimes resistance is loud. Sometimes it is the quiet work of reclaiming breath, laughter, presence. Sometimes it is the courage to take up a little more room in the world, to refuse the edits, to risk being seen. We inherit not only the logic of shrinking, but the memory of all who have tried, in whatever way they could, to become whole. The work remains, unfinished, often solitary, always dangerous. But every act of presence, every refusal to disappear, leaves a mark in the fabric of the world. To study the history of shrinking to fit is to remember that even the smallest gesture of expansion is never wasted. It is, at last, the beginning of a space where we might finally arrive. Elias Winter, author of Language Matters, a space for reflection on language, power, and decline. Thanks for reading Language Matters. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work.